Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome into DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger. Good to have you with us as we head towards a Father's Day weekend. Thank you so much. I know we had some issues on the Facebook side of things yesterday. Let's see if things are better on that front here today. Of course, if it's not, as always, you can migrate over to YouTube. It seemed like a lot of the Facebook folks yesterday who watch us live did have an enjoyable time doing that. And if you're catching the show in kind of an on-demand format later on, well, we appreciate you checking in, and hopefully it'll work out for you. And if not, DawgNation Daily is available even after the fact. They're on YouTube as well. And of course, I say podcast every single day also as well. Busy show for us. A lot of this related to UGA recruiting here today. It's Jeff's intel later on. A lot to talk to Jeff about. James Williams, the five-star safety, had an interesting announcement last night, I guess making me look pretty foolish after saying earlier this week that I didn't think he'd be reducing his top three to a top two. That is indeed exactly what he did do. So we'll have some fun with that today. Talk to Jeff more about that. There's also kind of a cool thing that Georgia has done on social media as of late, which I think gives us a little bit more of a glimpse into what the thinking process is for Georgia right now, the 2021 class, that we otherwise would not have had because of the dead period and kind of the absence of information that comes along because of that. We'll cover all of that. I've got an in-depth look at Georgia safety Richard LeCounte as a part of today's program, and a very interesting comparison with Georgia and another team that's a national championship contender this year, which I think deserves probably a deeper look as well. So we'll do all of that. Really glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
It's been a beautiful week weather-wise and a great chance to kind of close out our week here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger today. And so I think a lot of it, as a way of kind of keeping things fun around here, is going to be related to recruiting in some form or fashion. It's Jeff's intel later on. We'll dive deep into a lot of the recruiting subplots with him. Storylines have been out there. I'll do some of that off the top of the show. We will get to five-star safety James Williams' announcement from yesterday. Certainly some interesting stuff going on with that. However, before that, let me give some time to something that maybe I should have already given time to this week. A very interesting edit, social media-wise, that Chaz Chambliss, the Georgia linebacker commit, shared on social media recently. Jeff Sintel actually talked about this some on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, when he was on air a little earlier this week. If you're listening to the podcast, realize you can't see this, but I'll do my best to describe it. So Chaz Chambliss is there. It says calling all dogs, and he's tagging a bunch of people, Marius Mims and Brock Bowers, Corey Foreman. The edit part of this is really cool because it's almost like, I guess he's like the Terminator or RoboCop, like he's looking at the computer screen in front of him, so the words themselves are kind of transposed. It's a really creative, kind of a cool edit. I really like this one a lot, but there's something in particular that jumps out to me about this. Now, when it comes to Brock Bowers, we kind of know that Georgia's been going after and recruiting him, even though he's way out west in Napa, California. Enough of the UGA pledges and UGA targets have kind of talked about the relationship with Bowers. Bowers is clearly a tight end that Georgia wants. We even had that, I think, reaffirmed when Maliki Monteveo made the commitment to Oregon. Bowers got other choices, other places that he can go, but pretty clear Bowers is the tight end of desire for Georgia for this class of 2021. And by now, heaven knows, we've talked a ton about Marius Mims, and we may even do some more of that on the show today, but we know the relationship that exists between Mims and Georgia. We know this is a guy that Georgia's going after. However, when you see an edit like this of, hey, here are the guys who are in the fold, one of them being Chaz Chambliss, here are the top names, some of the top names that Georgia's going after, not all the names that Georgia's going after, but some of the names that Georgia is going after. When you see Corey Foreman's name show up on that, it's kind of a cool nod, I believe, by Georgia, acknowledging something we've kind of assumed. Foreman's arguably the top player in the country, big-time defensive line commit, way out west. When he decommitted from Clemson, there was this speculation of, well, does this mean that maybe Georgia's got a shot here? And, obviously there is some pull you would think from USC, a program geographically a lot closer. How involved is Georgia here? And because of what we've dealt with the coronavirus stuff and the fact that the dead period on recruiting has been extended, it's at least till July 31st now. Who knows when guys will be able to take visits again. The absence of these visits kind of lead to that absence of clues sometime about what Georgia's really doing and how deeply Georgia's involved with certain people. And we're left to kind of guess and speculate. We haven't had enough hard and fast evidence because we're not seeing a lot of these visits take place. And as the industry likes to say, follow those visits. Well, right now there's no visits to follow, so you're left to kind of do some wondering and some guessing. And in Foreman's case, also, he would seem to have some leverage in convincing a guy like Mason Smith, another very good defensive line prospect, to maybe those two guys want to play together. So Foreman could potentially have a huge impact on another recruit. So you were left wondering, well, how real is Georgia's relationship with Foreman? How involved is UGA in this recruitment after his decommit from Clemson? Well, I would say the fact that his name shows up on a social media edit that Chaz Chandler shared this week gives you an idea that, yeah, Georgia is heavily pursuing Foreman. And this is the kind of thing they don't have to make public, right? They could have kept this a secret. They could have, been content to do their recruiting work in darkness and, try to do a lot of the, private communications with Corey Foreman. But it's kind of a cool way, just kind of put some news out there. Just kind of let it be known of, yeah, we're making our intentions very real and very known. You're one of our priorities. Georgia fans, you'll see this tweet, you'll see this edit. And for some of you who've been kind of hungry for some fun recruiting stuff, the fact that we are publicly declaring this is a player that we're chasing down is kind of a cool thing all the way around. And it kind of reminds me of something that Kirby Smart said the other day, from the standpoint of, how recruiting's been made different because you're not able to take visits. All programs have been required to get a little bit more creative. I would say this edit that Chandler shares here is another example of that. In fact, here is Kirby Smart talking about that very same subject.
The recruiting world has probably changed as much as anything because you're just not capable of going to high schools. You mentioned May was a very active month for all of college football coaches, not just us. I mean, we would be going out watching spring practices. We would be going school to school. I wouldn't be able to because I don't get to go out in May. So that didn't really change for me, but it changed for a lot of our coaches. We've done what you guys know to be the case. There's no magic potion. There's nobody doing something magically that everybody else isn't doing. We're jumping on Zoom. We're communicating with parents, coaches, recruits. We're doing everything virtually, and that's really the best we can do. And, they keep extending the period that you can't come on campus, the recruiting, the ability to come to our campuses. They just extended that again. So it's looking like that's not going to happen through the end of July. So it's going to be a very different May, June, July period, and that's unique.
Yeah, so it's obviously unique, and it's forced the programs themselves to be unique in how they're going to get the recruiting business. And I think you see some examples of that from UGA. I don't know how much a social media edit like this sways a recruit, but it's probably better than nothing. And at least it keeps the fans a little bit more involved in the process along the way. So kind of a cool thing for Georgia. And I think you trust the UGA staff to manage those Zoom meetings, those video teleconference meetings well, just given the fact that Smart has mentioned many times in the past about how careful they want to be not to overdo this kind of thing. I've joked before, it's almost like, if you've ever known someone who's a salesman by trade, salesperson by trade, it's that commission breath where you're constantly asking somebody for a referral, constantly asking somebody for some business, whatever. At a certain point in time, there's a repellent quality to that. I think that Kirby Smart's very well aware of this too, so they're trying to be more creative how they, put their business out there, and this is probably an example of that. So some fun stuff there. Speaking of what else was fun in the last 24 hours involving recruits on social media, making a fool out of me pretty clearly, because the other day we talked about James Williams, the 5-star safety, who tweeted out, hey, I'm looking for some people to help me do an edit. Sometimes we see the programs themselves share edits about players to the players. In some cases, the recruits themselves create their own edits. James Williams the other day had said, hey, I'm looking for somebody to help me come up with an edit. And I think I took the bait on this the way that a lot of people probably did of, it looks like 5-star safety James Williams getting ready to make his commitment announcement because he's already given out a top 3. Probably not going to turn a top 3 into a top 2. So it may be that James Williams getting ready to make his announcement. Well, shows you what I know, because yesterday James Williams did whittle a top 3 down to a top 2. Let me show you the top 2, and then we'll kind of talk about how this is interesting. Kind of a nice edit here. Good job there by Hayes Fawcett, I guess is the guy's name. He does a lot of these. You see Georgia on one side. You now see Miami on the other side. So it's now down to Georgia and Miami for James Williams. Obviously, a UGA fan, you love the idea of the Dogs being there. But as many of you are aware, what makes this top 2 interesting is that Miami was not in the top 3. If we go back in time here a little bit, the top 3 for James Williams at the time were really the 3 top recruiting programs in college football right now. The apologies to Ohio State. It was Alabama, it was Georgia, it was Clemson, with Georgia right there in the middle. So Alabama, Clemson now jettisoned from this list, and it's Miami as the replacement. Now, is this good news for Georgia, who's in the middle of the top three in between Alabama and Clemson, and now in the top two, the only from the top three to survive into the top two, and now going head-to-head with the hometown team for James Williams? Is this all good news for Georgia? I don't know. Obviously, I've already gotten one prediction wrong on Williams because I said that he probably wouldn't turn a top three into a top two. This is one of those things that's both kind of, thoroughly entertaining while also a little, maybe for some, a little irritating too, because, in some cases, some of this stuff can be kind of hard to follow. The truth is, I've always loved the soap opera of recruiting. I've always loved the drama. There's a certain preposterous nature to some of this kind of stuff, and the top three turning into a top two with a different team in the top two is maybe an example of that. I think this is all really fun, and James Williams is obviously a player worth chasing down. As we've said before, he's a different kind of player in the fact that he's a tall safety and the kind of guy that could potentially be sort of a positionless player at a place like Georgia and a huge part of future defenses. So as he whittles down a top three to a top two and Georgia hopes to be the final one, I think he is definitely a prospect worth waiting on. When you kind of factor him in to what's going on with Corey Foreman, what could potentially be going on with some other recruits here during the month of June, which we'll talk more to Jeff Sintel about in just a moment. The recruiting work of the 2021 class would seem to be starting to get a little bit fun. Some rumors being dropped, some possible news on the way. Good time to be a Dog fan as UGA puts together another elite recruiting class. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Good to have you with us live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, usually on the radio at noon, every single day on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and, of course, podcasts, however you get them. Good to have you with us here today. I mentioned before we'll talk to Jeff Sintel in just a moment. Before that, let me make you aware of a couple things. Of course, DawgNation.com, the place to go to find out more about this. We are coming towards the end of our voting for our Kroger Father's Day sweepstakes. Many of you participated in this. You've got your photos up there. You're encouraging people to go to DawgNation.com and vote. And if you are watching on video, you can see this on your screen. Just click the story for the Father's Day giveaway. Click into that. When you get in there, you'll see a lot of the different choices to vote on. And once you do that, just simply click on the photo, and then you can vote right there. It's a very easy way to do this, very fun thing to be a part of. I tell you, I have loved kind of going through here and seeing a lot of the submissions, seeing all the fun stuff that's there. I've really enjoyed getting a chance to do that. You can cast your vote there, do your thing at DawgNation.com. The winner will be announced coming up on Father's Day. Someone's going to win a Kroger, a grill from Kroger. Someone's going to win a gift card from Kroger. It's an incredible giveaway. And if you've got your photo or video in there at DawgNation.com, continue to encourage folks to cast that vote for you. And of course, please go to DawgNation.com. Even if you don't know any of the people who are a part of this, it's just kind of a fun thing to participate in, kind of a fun thing to do. As I've said before, one of my favorite things about the Kroger giveaway we've done in honor of Father's Day, it's just a reminder to me of the joy that I have had about sharing the experience of being a UGA fan with my kids, and just the great feeling of knowing that was going to pass down to me. I'll show you a picture here for those of you watching on video of my dad. He's on vacation right now, but this goes back to an event we had around DawgNation not too long ago, and always been a big Georgia fan, made sure to kind of bring me up right that very same way. So I'm obviously thinking about him as we head towards Father's Day. Many of you lucky enough to be able to spend some time with your dad or with your own children as the dad. This Kroger Father's Day giveaway is a great way to remind us all of that, and also just kind of connect to the joy we've had with those experiences with our dads or our kids when it comes to UGA fandom there as well. So some really fun stuff there in that regard. DawgNation.com to cast your vote on that. Let me, before we get recruiting talk from Jeff Sintel, do something here just for a minute on Georgia safety Richard LeCounte. I have been of the belief for a while that LeCounte is an underrated player. And I mean this differently than maybe sometimes we take this to mean. Sometimes when we say underrated player, we mean, well, the national media, those, lousy folks, they don't pay enough attention to him. They don't know enough about him. He doesn't get the credit he deserves from the national media. In this particular case with LeCounte, that's not what I believe is true. I think the national media, to the extent that they, are paying attention, I actually think that LeCounte is fairly accurately rated by them. I think that sometimes Richard LeCounte's actually underrated by UGA fans themselves. And I've always felt like this has been true for a very specific reason. LeCounte owns his mistake. He's very willing, and no player's perfect, right? Every player's going to make a mistake at some point in time. And when LeCounte has made a mistake in the past, he's owned it. Been very open about talking about it, very open about working to get better. And I think because he has spoken so openly about this, more fans have been aware of maybe some of his shortcomings in a way that sometimes we're not necessarily aware of other players because, LeCounte's just been so open about this. And so therefore it's led to, I believe, a diminished opinion of LeCounte in comparison to how good of a player he actually is. Let me give you a quick example of this, and I want to make another point on it. Go back to last year in the springtime, heading into LeCounte's junior season, and the subject came up of, wanting to be a better tackler, maybe wanting to add some mass, some physicality so that he could be a better tackler the way that, great safeties need to be. And when LeCounte was fed that question by a reporter, did not duck it, did not move away from it, took it head on. Here's an example from Richard LeCounte going back to last spring.
Off season, it looks like you've been more physical since the Sugar Bowl. Maybe the effort to beef up the tackling or strength. What have you done in that?
Oh yeah, definitely. That was a point of emphasis doing off season training. Try to put on at least 15 pounds. So since January, I have put on 12 to 15. Just keeping on bulk, being able to be more physical at the point of attack and tackling. Going back to my fundamentals, basic tackling. Being able to help the team because that's the main reason why.
Can you tell the difference when you bring it now?
Oh, yeah, I definitely feel better. I feel more confident in my strength and things like that because I feel, that I put in a lot of work to be able to, change that problem that I had last year.
So that's an example of what I said a moment ago. LeCounte viewing an imperfection in his game, essentially taking it head on and taking full responsibility for making it better. I think fans have kind of noticed that. But it's obvious that even with LeCounte acknowledging what he acknowledges there, he is more than a solid starter for Georgia. He is a very good player. However, I think it's now time for Richard LeCounte to take his game to the next level. I think it's now time for Richard LeCounte to go from being a very good player and now become a great player. And with that in mind, at least if Georgia's going to win the national championship, be a part of everything by the end of the season that it can be, that's, I think, the next step for Richard LeCounte. With that in mind, I thought it was very interesting that the Pro Football Network putting out its list of top 10 safeties for the upcoming NFL draft, guys who are draft eligible for 2021. Richard LeCounte did show up on this list. He's number 8 on this list right now of the top draft eligible safeties for 2021. Let me show you, if you're watching on video, if you're listening podcast, I'll read this to you, what Matt Valdovinos, who we've quoted on the show before from the Pro Football Network, says about LeCounte's game. He says one of the most well-rounded players in the class, Richard LeCounte, has arguably the highest floor of any safety in the class. Interesting the way that he says that. Valdovinos goes on to say, consistently productive for the Bulldogs. He projects as a quality starter in the NFL. LeCounte has decent size, decent athletic ability, and a decent skill set all around. Unfortunately, that can, Valdovinos goes on to say, be both a pro and a con, as it lowers his ceiling in the NFL. Will LeCounte ever be, listen to this, this is a very interesting question. Will LeCounte ever be an impact playmaker? Potentially, but I wouldn't bet on it. However, he can be a consistent and quality starter for a long time, and in that he means in the NFL. So that's obviously what's at stake for Richard LeCounte, going from being what is a very good player, and certainly the kind of player that you could see drafted within the first 3 rounds very easily next April, but could somehow he put together enough dynamic playmaking moments that he jumps up into, say, second round or potentially even the first round, which we've seen some mock drafts that have suggested LeCounte could be that kind of player. But it takes a big senior season from LeCounte to get there. I'll give you an example of this. Some of the safeties that were rated ahead of LeCounte on this list in the Pro Football Network, I didn't necessarily know. But one of them that I'm very well aware of is from LSU, Jacoby Stevens. Now, Stevens is a good player. And Stevens, I think even some of the LSU fans who watch us or listen to us every single day would say, has never been, in question of being one of the 11 best defensive players that LSU has, someone who needs to be on the field. In some cases, there's been some questions about, what position is Jacoby Stevens? Maybe tried cornerback some at the very beginning of his career. At one brief moment, I think flirted with being a linebacker. They've kind of moved him around a lot. He's kind of settled on being a safety. That's a player that the Pro Football Network rates ahead of Richard LeCounte for the upcoming NFL draft. But for Georgia to achieve everything it can this season, that's the example of the kind of player, a good player from LSU, that LeCounte needs to outplay as he works his name up the draft boards and as Georgia itself has that great team success. I'm a big believer that team success is a composite of a lot of individual guys maximizing their top-end performance. Richard LeCounte's a name to watch in that regard for UGA this year. Unquestionably, he has been a solid starter for Georgia, a very good player. But as he transitions from good to that next level, That's one of those necessary steps for Georgia to take on its way to a possible national championship. Good to have you here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. A very interesting look at Georgia later on in the show in comparison to another national championship contender. A lot of similarities, and both teams trying to take that next step this season. We'll do that later on. For now, more on the recruiting stuff, including the top 2 for James Williams last night. Let's talk to Jeff Sentell.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Boy, really good to get some recruiting talk from Jeff Sentell here today, especially with some of the stuff that's been out there as of late. So we'll kind of dive into this. Jeff, appreciate you being with us here today. Hope you're getting ready for a great Father's Day weekend. Thanks for spending your time with us, and just hope you're doing well.
Hey, Brandon, happy Friday, man. I hear some Richard LeCounte talk early off start today and draft projections, and I'm sure the master of the segue here, you're going to try and transition that to another potential playmaker on defense as well.
Yeah, you know me too well, because LeCounte is the safety of the moment, but the next generation safety for Georgia, at least fans hope, could be James Williams, who I thought this was very entertaining last night, taking a top 3 to a top 2 and taking 2 of the teams out of the top 3 and forming a new top 2 with Georgia and a newcomer, the hometown team of Miami. For some people, I guess they could be forgiven if their head is spinning a little bit after all of this, but Williams is certainly a player worth waiting on as he goes through his deliberations here. What can you tell us about all of this, where things stand with Williams right now? I guess you take it as a good news that Georgia survives the next round of this. Alabama and Clemson, after all, did not. But what do you know about this at the moment?
Well, first of all, he's about 6'5" and 220 pounds. If you look at his tape, Brandon, it's a marvel. Like when I watch his tape and I talk to folks that really know James Williams or scout his game and look at his game, I think the general consensus comes to mind is that they feel sorry for the high school football players in Florida that he still gets to bash and hit for another year, because man, he's looked like, to me, he's been ready to play college football all last year at least. He looked like a 5-star prospect, senior prospect when he was a junior. And his ratings have kind of reflected that, Brandon. He bounces around from defensive athlete now is what he is, to he was the nation's number 1 safety. He's the number 11 overall prospect. You see his highlight tape, Brandon, and he's making plays in the middle of the field. He's blitzing in on downs. He's kind of trying to do some of this Troy Polamalu act at 6 feet 5 inches and about 220 pounds. He, to me, it's always seemed like Georgia was in a comfy, cozy spot for him. He's really visiting Georgia the most. But I don't know if you or our viewers this morning remember, but James Williams sent out a tweet maybe a couple weeks ago where he's like, once this pandemic is over, I can't wait to meet this man. And he was talking about Dabo Swinney, he's talking about Clemson football, and they were in his top 3 that he just dropped mid-February. And now he comes back around full circle with a top 2, and Georgia's the team that remains consistent. No Alabama, no Clemson. And then you've got Miami, a team which is kind of his hometown team. He was at one time committed to the Hurricanes as well, a long time ago. And to me, Brendan, it just feels like one of those South Florida recruitments that's going to go a long way. And that's by design. Tyreek Stevenson went that way. Tyson Campbell went that way. They just want to take their due diligence. While with James Williams, I mean, I would have to say that the industry has pointed towards James Williams likely being a Bulldog for going on almost 2 years now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's the kind of player, there's a unicorn or two in every class. Maybe Darnell Washington was an example of that last year of, oh my gosh, the physicality with the athleticism. This is the kind of player that just sort of transcends, a typical, kind of recruit that we talk about. He's just such a unique specimen compared to other guys in his position. I'm not saying that James Williams is the best player in America. I'm not saying that the guy I just mentioned, Darnell Washington, was going to be the best player from the 2020 class. That's kind of not what I'm saying. I'm saying there are a few players in every cycle who are just so obviously visually different than the other guys they're being compared to. I think Williams, because of his height, is an example of that for me for the class of 2021. I have no idea if he'll be the best player in this class or the best player that Georgia could potentially sign. but he's kind of in a lot of ways the most interesting that you watch on film, or at least for me he is. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll be very extreme on this, Brandon. If I had to, you had to open up all of high school football in these recruits and make it like a fantasy draft, and I had to pick the best potential player for my season for this next season. Notice I'm saying player there and not prospect.
Right.
Player. I would pick James Williams. He would be my first pick because you're going to get a a difference maker, a defensive solution at safety. I'm not talking about the guy that could cover the Darnell Washingtons, the Eric Gilbert, Theo Johnsons at tight end, the guy that could slide through A gap and B gap and make plays behind the line, the guy that can cover the middle of the field and stay step for step with fast receivers coming over the top to be over the top coverage on a 9 route. He can do all those things. And you see his film, Brandon, and he's also a very deadly edge receiver. He's high pointing balls. He's going up and getting fade routes. He's a guy that seems like he can do it all. And I'm going to be very clear on this word choice here. There are guys that can come in and even with the Death Star type of Georgia's roster that can earn their way on the field, can make the plays in practice and rise up the depth chart. And that's going to come fewer and fewer with all these stacked recruiting classes one on top of another. James Williams is one of those rare players. I'd probably throw Corey Foreman in here as well, that you can sit there and you're going to go, how can Georgia not get this guy on the field, or when can they get him on the field? Because they really don't have anything quite like a James Williams who could be a depth, Brandon, and not just a liability or somebody that somebody can exploit when they go tempo. James Williams can be like that chess piece, that queen on the chessboard that can do everything in every direction, the length of the game board. He can do all these things. And it's almost a point where you go, how can a school like Georgia or an Alabama or a Clemson or a Miami, how can they keep him off the field when he comes in as a freshman? Because like I said earlier, he's looked like he was already ready to play college football for the last 1 to 2 years.
Okay, I've got a lot I want to talk to you about, so I don't want to spend too much time on Williams. There's one more thing I want to squeeze in on this. Last week when we saw Romello Brinson choose to stay at home for Miami, actually recommitting to Miami, and the thought was that he chose Miami over Georgia. Is that an indication that Miami recruiting momentum under Manny Diaz is more real now? I've always felt like that Miami was one of the easiest programs to recruit against because they have 24 commitments every single year, it seems. Just very, very easy to convince a player to leave Miami. That's just proven to be true the last couple of cycles. Is that about to be less true under Manny Diaz, do you think?
I think, Brandon, they just got innate internal issues with really competing with the big boys at Miami. Folks will remember the Jaden Hazelwood recruitment where, if they have the game day experience at Miami and then they can compare it to a Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State, there's no way the Hurricanes are going to match up with that unless they eliminate that 30, 45-minute bus ride from the facility to the stadium. The stadium's not always full. The results on the field. I think Miami is one of those programs that, in terms of the arms race and in terms of keeping up with the Joneses in college football, they've got a lot. They've got a lot left to catch up with. They've got a lot left to improve. When you think of Miami, their legacy, Brennan, you go back to the days of the U, you go back to the days of Sean Taylor, you go back to the days of Ed Reed, Frank Gore, Jeremy Shockey. You think of those players. You think of those great teams, 2001, 2002, 2003. And you think of the turnover chain, and you think of, green and orange. But you don't really see them stacking up with the rest of big-time college football. And I think that's an area where Georgia has been able to go into South Florida and really reap the benefits of coming in and saying, hey, SEC football, national contender, we're putting players in the league, our facilities are as good as anyone, you've got a great education. I just think Miami's having a hard time checking more of the boxes that other schools are.
I talked about this before you joined the show today, that the Chaz Chambliss edit, and I know you discussed this on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger on Wednesday, where UGA kind of acknowledges in that edit, hey, we're chasing down Brock Bowers. We're chasing down the nation's #1 player, Corey Foreman. For me, Jeff, this felt like kind of a new thing in the world of recruiting, and probably the kind of thing necessitated more by the fact that there are no visits right now during the recruiting dead period. It's clearly a pretty cool edit, visually speaking, but in terms of openly acknowledging recruiting priorities, this kind of felt like a bit of a new frontier for me. Did you see it the same way?
I think it's kind of just a different step, Brandon. It's kind of like you got to let your edit and your recruits do some of the talking. And there's a little bit of show cards to that when you look at, who's Georgia just putting out on Front Street, who the main targets are and who the priorities are. You have one with a map that has a top 4, and then you have one kind of like we've wrote about on DawgNation and we talked about on Before the Hedges. It's kind of makes you feel like you're in a heads-up display for you and I, Brandon. We think of the T-1000 or the T-800 from Terminator back in our time.
Right.
Kids today are going to think first-person shooter and Fortnite, or maybe the Call of Duty games where you have those heads-up displays and you have targeting and it looks really fancy and slick. But I wanted to play this game with you, Brandon. If this topic came up,
please.
And this is totally unrehearsed, totally off the script, but I want to know what Brandon thought of first. And this is not Da Vinci Code, but this is the DawgNation Code or something like that. And Brandon, which one of those things caught your eye the most? Was it A, 9 out of 20? Was it B, the top 4 in the top northeast quadrant? Was it the remaining targets in the southeast quadrant? Was it the lack of Mason Smith or a Terrence Ferguson? Which one of those really was your first takeaway from that edit, Brandon?
Yeah, I noticed all those things. The number 20 on there, I'm not even really sure what to make about that because I'm assuming that Georgia will sign more than 20 players. You're right. A couple names don't show up. Ferguson's not on there. Mason Smith's not on there. I guess the fact that Georgia's just mentioning these recruits by name, to me, that just kind of felt really cool, especially at a time in which, if you want to go back a few weeks ago, Jeff, when Corey Foreman first decommitted from Clemson, a guy like me doing a show like this is left to speculate. There are no visits to follow. There's not a lot of, public stuff out there, in terms of, hey, what's going on with these guys? But when Georgia will put his name on there, we've I think long speculated that Brock Bowers is a big priority for Georgia. Other recruits have mentioned Bowers by name. So from that standpoint, you're not as surprised by that necessarily. But for someone like me who wants every little tidbit that he can scarf up, the fact that Georgia's now, sort of dropping these names, via recruits, obviously, who have a little bit more freedom in terms of, publicizing stuff like this, I think that's a pretty good step forward for us all, to be honest with you.
It's funny, Brennan. I thought when you see Cass Chambliss, his imagery there as a hunter, as a tracker, as a guy that's going to chase folks down, I think that was appropriate because he does look like a Terminator from our kind of silver screen type days or whatever. But the other thing that showed up to me, Brennan, about that is there's really only 2 offensive players on that whole edit.
Yep.
That's Brock Bowers and that's Amarius Mims.
Yep.
And that just kind of speaks to Georgia and where this class is going. I want folks to remember last year, Georgia, I believe, signed 16 offensive players in the 2020 recruiting class that also finished number 1. Now you see the emphasis will definitely shift towards the defensive side of the ball. You've got Munden in the corner. Some people needed some help on the DawgNation forum figuring out who all the names were that weren't identified. It goes from top left to right, from top left to bottom right. It goes, I think it goes Smile Munden, and it goes James Williams. It goes Dallas Turner. It goes Isaiah Johnson, and then it goes Xavier Story Jr. as well. So that down below, you've got nothing but defensive guys that are also seen in the corner. People are just getting really deep into it. Like, why are those guys not targeted? Is that the next wave? And it was almost, some people are saying, who's not there? Does that mean that the folks that are not there are silent? Well, folks, I can assure you that Mason Smith is not a silent commitment to Georgia at this time. I don't mean you to folks to spill your coffee right now during your breakfast morning, but the other thing I think we probably need to, I talked about this on the forum thread a little bit, the status of 9 out of 20. Folks, if you believe that Georgia will only sign 20 people in a recruiting class, you probably haven't been paying a lot of attention to Kirby Smart because, smart guys like me that have our ear to the ground, we usually say Georgia will end up with 23 or 24, and somehow they end up with 26, and then they have room for a couple of graduate transfers. Like Kirby Smart's like finding scholarships the way us in college used to find, tip for the pizza guy in the cushions of our couch or something like that. Like he's like, let me scratch around and see if I can find another one. But it may equate to how many high school players they might sign in this class, because you start thinking about Jared Zirkle's blue shirt. You start thinking about Trey Kitty coming in as a graduate transfer. you start thinking of the way Georgia always seems to operate now, to have at least one or two left for graduate transfer season. It might be a way for Georgia to get the 20 high school prospects in this class, but maybe add a couple of more from a different method or a different means.
All right, I got a lot of names I want to ask you about because you just rattled off a number of them. So we'll try to do this in semi-rapid fire fashion. It doesn't have to be full-on rapid fire, but semi-rapid fire. You wrote this week, Tony Grimes has reconsidered the possibility of being a reclassified recruit, going to stick with his 2021 status here. Give us, I guess, the latest on him. I certainly take it as good news. I guess I was always under the assumption that Virginia would play high school football. I understand why if you're Grimes, you might feel differently about that because it affects your life a lot more than it affects mine. From afar, though, I sort of saw Virginia as playing. It seems like that's the case now. Grimes is going to remain a 2021 recruit, and I take that as pretty good news for UGA. What can you tell us about Grimes at the moment?
Yeah, I think both paths would have been good for Georgia, but I think this path is better for Georgia. I think the thing that I was really concerned about was, would his school in Virginia Beach, Princess Anne, which is not the biggest, public school or anything like that. I think they only have like 45 players. I think a bunch of those, like Tony Grimes, will actually play both ways. I wondered about them deciding that they would field football, or maybe all of the schools on their schedule were going to field football. I think that was another consideration, not just where Virginia was at with the pandemic. But, Tony Grimes, I wrote about this on DawgNation.com, how it just sets up so much better for Georgia for him to show up in January of 2021 rather than August of 2020. We've mentioned the 89 to the 85 in terms of Georgia's got to lighten a few scholarships, at least publicly, about what it needs to get to the NCAA mandated allotment of 85 student athletes on scholarship for football enrolled at one time. But, all the reasons that made Georgia attractive for Tony Grimes in 2021, there were kind of going to be impediments for him to be playing a lot in 2020. I mean, Tony Grimes could come in as the next incarnation of Derek Stingley for Georgia, or Keely Ringo could be the same way this year. And then he's going to have a hard time stealing a lot of reps away from DJ Daniel, from Tyson Campbell, and also from Eric Stokes, because those guys have been in a pretty complicated Georgia defense for 3 seasons now, and they've all got 3 seasons of Sinclair's weight training and conditioning on top of all that. On top of all that, these are 20, 21-year-old guys. It was going to be hard for anybody to do that. Then you would think about, where would Tony Grimes fit in with a Keely Ringo? Where would he fit in with a Tyreek Stevenson? It seems Georgia is the land of plenty in the back of the defensive secondary, even when you consider LeCounte leaving, Stokes leaving, Mark Webb Jr. leaving, on and on, the aforementioned Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell, all these, DJ Daniel, all these these defensive backs that are just kind of running off the table. They just got a lot of guys, a lot of dudes back there. And for Georgia, for them to welcome in Tony Grimes in January of 2021, that's the best, rosiest recruiting picture for Tony Grimes, considering he wants to come in and play right away, because as we all know, other schools like North Carolina, Texas A&M, Ohio State's probably the outlier here, but those schools just don't have the depth chart picture that's as attractive as Georgia is for Tony Grimes.
You knew this question was coming at some point. It is June. I have been told to be on the lookout for a June announcement decision from Smile Mondon, the 5-star linebacker. Any new info on Mondon's situation?
Hey, Brennan, you want it to be June the 29th at 11:45 a.m.? Is that what you want me to say? And then you can do it in the middle of your show. Is
sure.
That what you want?
Yeah, listen, that'd be great breaking news for us here. But as much as we'd love the content, I think for Georgia fans, they just want the name to be added to that list of commitments at some point in time. So that's certainly one we've got our attention on at the moment.
Brent, I wonder what would happen if Georgia clicked off all 20 of those names on that Jazz Chambliss edit in the next 6 weeks. I know that's something that would fit the short attention span of Georgia recruiting, but man, what would there be left to talk about the rest of the year?
Oh, listen, we'd find something to worry about. There'd be no doubt something to worry about if that happened.
Would you create some anxiety or some angst, stir up some things around DawgNation about how hard will it be to hold on to all these 5-stars and all these recruits?
Sure.
Once the recruiting portal opens back up and they can have visits.
I'll just say it this way: that'd be a good problem to have. I'll put it that way.
So would that be a Georgia DawgNation problem? Would that be one of those?
Yeah, no doubt
one of those
about
problems.
no doubt about that. But it does seem like, I guess, things have kind of gone silent with Mondon for the moment.
I think Mondon is still. Remember, here's what it was. How the cards were laid out on the table to me, and it was described to me, is that he thinks he doesn't need any more visits, and he thinks the month of June would be right for him to make a decision. And I think that's the way they looked at the whole entire month of June. It might just reach a point where he gets to late June and he's like, nah, I'm still not feeling it. I still got some indecisiveness. Because you can bet whatever decision he comes to or gets close to coming, kind of like Fury and Ingram Dawkins as well, there'll be other schools that try to get him to hold off a little bit longer and to keep waiting. I think it's part of it, Brendan, a little bit of the culture of things right now where, one of the reasons Smile Mondon wanted to wait till the end of his senior year is he wanted recruiters to be able to come visit his team, to check him out, to people keep coming by so he can show off the other pretty good players at Paulding County High School as well. But, man, I think that's just a rosy outlook that I don't even know is even going to happen. I mean, I think we've talked about this a little bit on the forum, maybe at least once on your program, but I'd kind of be surprised if recruits are not back on campus before maybe September the 1st, maybe mid to late August. I think we're that far away from the type of real currency or the real traction for all these recruits and schools to make a move. Like, a lot of people think that somebody gets off a Zoom call and they have a great virtual visit. All of a sudden, the recruits, the emojis are popping up into their eyes about parks and birds are chirping or whatever. It just doesn't happen that way. I mean, really, it's just a lot of status quo with a lot of these guys. Like, no recruit, at least the ones I've talked to, have said, oh, man, School X had 3 tremendous Zoom visits over the last month, and they've gone up from number 4 to number 1 on my list. That's just not happening. Really, it's all about kind of constant maintenance and watering and, basically just every day, every week, just trying to make these recruits still feel like they're a priority. Really, with these young men, the biggest thing on their mind is just getting back amongst their high school football teams and being a big part of their high school football programs and moving forward with those first small steps.
I want to finish with a question about another linebacker prospect in just a moment. Let me squeeze in one thing before we get there, though. When it comes to 5-star offensive tackle Marius Mims, the most consistent threat it would have seemed to Georgia for him has been Alabama. This week, though, the Crimson Tide got a commitment from a very good-looking offensive line prospect, J.C. Latham. Does the presence of Latham in Alabama's 2021 class do anything to lessen whatever concern might have existed that Alabama was a player for Mims?
No, I don't think it does at all. I think Alabama, they're going to lose Leatherwood. They're going to lose another guy. I mean, what they're really on, I think there was even an Marius Mims tweet this week or recently after the J.C. Latham commitment. It's very rare, Brandon, but Latham is he is more highly rated than Marius at offensive tackle, and he could be seen as the more polished prospect of the two. But those are two guys that look like left tackles. That's the one thing you can think about with that recruiting class. And Bama's recruiting at one point it was 50th, 54th, and it slowly moved up with Latham. Latham was really a big pull away from Ohio State there, Brandon. That was one school that I'd always heard that Latham was the one. Latham and Ohio State was the school to watch there, and now you have Alabama with its kind of cornerstone prototype left tackle in the class. Georgia and Amarius it's always been like, I think the other thing, and Brendan, I know if you think back and you think forward, how many times you're going to mention Georgia, Alabama over the next 3 months until we get to that Saturday in September. Well, That's kind of what the recruiting cycle is going to be like. Maybe the first time ever where I can point to 4 or 5 really big chess pieces or dominoes for Georgia's best possible recruiting class in 2021. You got Dallas Turner, it looks like Georgia, Alabama. You got Xavier Story Jr., it looks like Georgia, Alabama with a little bit of Florida in there. You got Amarius Mims, Georgia, Alabama. A lot of those guys keep popping up as, Georgia and Alabama are kind of going to be the teams that are going to have to duke it out for a lot of these top prospects, which is basically what the season looks like with that circled schedule game in September as well.
Of course, Latham goes to IMG Academy, and this week we found out that Xavier Sori, or at least within the last few days, we found out that Xavier Sori is transferring to IMG Academy. That's a player I'd love to see Georgia get, and I guess I take it, Jeff, as good news that he's going to IMG. I don't know how Georgia ranks in terms of having recruited IMG. Georgia probably hasn't gotten every player it wants from IMG, but it's gotten a lot. And so in terms of Georgia's pursuit of Sorey, putting him in Bradenton there at IMG, I kind of take that as a little bit of good news. From a Georgia fan's perspective, do you think that's true?
I think it's probably the best news the way I see it, Brandon. I'll just be totally honest. To me, it's going to certify just how good Xavier Sorey actually is.
Okay.
Whether he can come in and play right away. Because, IMG's the best of the best. That's the reputation. They're going to be 15 to 20 other SEC prospects on that same field with him every practice day, and he's going to be playing a national schedule. And that kind of is going to work well to maybe shore up the areas about Xavier Sorey's game, where a lot of people know him for his football and his basketball. He's seen as a projectable athlete where he could be outside linebacker. I think he would be an inside linebacker for Georgia. And you sit there and you go, how good is he? How tested is he? What does this competition look like? How early could he come in and play right away? Georgia's had a history now of inside linebackers, even the finest inside linebackers they've signed, where they have to wait a little bit in order to rise to the top of the depth chart. I think with Xavier, and I would say that he'll have Lavoisier Cyril in there as a guy that's going to Georgia that's at IMG Academy. I think there's a couple of guys I'd watch for maybe in the 2022 class to look at in terms of potential Georgia fits with IMG Academy as well. But the main takeaway I am is you're really going to be able to check his oil and see what's underneath the hood and find out whether Xavier Sorey is the type of player that all his recruiting rankings and all these projections are making him out to be.
Jeff, great stuff. Thanks for being here on Before the excuse me. I've done that now a few times. Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, is your show. People should check that out on Wednesdays on the DawgNation video channels. But thank you today for being on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And as said before, hope you're setting yourself up for a great Father's Day weekend.
Hey, Brandon, happy Father's Day to you and all the fathers out there. And, hey, man, I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Sounds great.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, a little long with Jeff there today on that one, but there was a lot of recruiting stuff I wanted to hit, and he's good enough to share a lot of time with us. And, of course, follow him. The work that he's doing there at DawgNation.com, the stuff in the forum at forum.DawgNation.com. As we said before, every Wednesday on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, 6 p.m., the DawgNation video channels. Just a really fun way to stay up to date on everything going on with UGA recruiting. A couple of SEC stories here, SEC Through time. This is one at a certain point in time that probably deserves a serious look into. This is, I think, a semi-complicated story. I don't have the energy to make this, super serious, so I'm going to take a lighthearted approach to this. Florida has announced, the university president has announced, they're not going to do the Gator bait song. If you go to the cocktail party, this thing is just like earworm. It's they play it over and over and over again. Crowd chants Gator bait. I guess it dates back to mid '90s. A Florida player kind of made this famous in terms of that phrase. Kind of dates back to then. But there's some unfortunate imagery, I guess, tied to this. Not the song itself, but just the phrase. It's all super complicated. And Florida's not going to do it anymore. Like I said, I don't have the energy to treat this seriously. I'll just say that in the name of harmony in our society, if we have to cancel Florida traditions, I'm all in favor of doing that. Whatever Florida tradition we need to cancel to make life harmonious now, I got no problem with. This is a story that's out there, though. It'd be odd if we didn't mention it, but I don't have the energy to take this super, super seriously today. On a different topic involving the Florida Gators, I saw where 3-star safety Dakota Mitchell, that's a name we brought up on the show a little earlier this week, he has now committed to Florida shortly after naming a group of finalists that did include UGA. It was never very obvious how involved Georgia was in Mitchell's recruitment. In fact, and we don't ever take any kind of jabs at players, including players that go to Florida, but there's certainly the whiff of maybe this was a little bit of a setup all the way around, that Mitchell knew he was going to Florida, but somehow people around Florida like the idea of, mentioning Georgia here as setting this up as a head-to-head win for Florida over Georgia when it comes to Dakota Mitchell. That's obviously, I don't think, what has gone on here, just given the fact that we've spent so much of today's show talking about a very different player from a very similar position in the 5-star James Williams. It seems pretty obvious that's where Georgia's attention mostly lies here. This is not a jab at Dakota. He may go on to be a great player. He's obviously good enough to earn a commitment, at least at one point in time, from LSU. But pretty clearly this is another example, I would say, of Florida being in on a recruit of a little bit different level than the ones that Georgia's looking at for the very same position. But nonetheless, former LSU pledge Dakota Mitchell has now made his commitment to Florida. This I thought was pretty interesting. So Alabama and Ohio State yesterday announced a home-and-home series. It's going to be, I think, 2027 and 2028, the 2 years for this. That's when this is going to go down. And this very much plays into something that has been a little bit of a hot topic as of late. A lot of Alabama folks love the idea of Georgia somehow copying Alabama. Do you remember this has been a hot topic? Remember the lights? It had to be like, at one point in time, even an official from Georgia actually on the record kind of responded to the idea of when Georgia bought its LED lights, the flashing lights that were first displayed in the Notre Dame game, because there was this Alabama thing out there that Georgia had only gotten lights after Alabama had gotten LED lights, and Georgia got to show theirs off first. Alabama didn't get to do theirs until later on in the season, and as can only happen in the SEC, it was sort of strangely controversial for a while about who bought the LED lights first between Georgia and Alabama. So there's been this thing out there. Well, Kirby and Georgia always trying to copy Alabama. I guess hiring Scott Cochran's an example of that. I don't know. You'd have to talk to an Alabama fan to find out more about what all the supposed copyings that Georgia has done of Alabama. However, I mean, isn't it undeniable that this is clearly an example of Alabama copying Georgia? And I'm not being funny. I'm not being snarky. And I'm not being, trollish. This is obviously something that Georgia was doing first. In fact, it wasn't even obviously a good idea when Kirby Smart first started doing this, scheduling these very difficult home-and-home series with the Clemsons and the Texases. Obviously, Notre Dame predated Kirby Smart in terms of being scheduled. Ohio State's on the schedule for Georgia. You can think about all of these that going to Oklahoma a million years from now. You can think of all of these things that Georgia's chosen to schedule. And at the time, some people were like, wow, is this really a good idea to schedule this many big-time non-conference games? In some years, Georgia's got 2 scheduled for the same year in terms of big-time non-conference things, and yet it was an example of what Kirby Smart wanted to do, be very bold in building a schedule that could not prevent, that would eliminate the possibility that Georgia could be kept out of the college football playoff playing such a tough schedule. It was a bold decision when Kirby Smart made it. I don't think anybody can deny that. So bold and apparently such a good idea that Alabama is essentially walking in the same steps after Georgia on this front. Who are 3 of the teams I mentioned that Georgia has just played? Notre Dame and a home-and-home. Got a schedule coming up with Texas, Ohio State. Those same 3 programs Alabama has also scheduled games with here as well. Now, I think this is good for college football all the way around. The fact there are going to be more of these big-time non-conference games. No disrespect to the neutral site stuff. Georgia plays in Atlanta to start this season. That's a really fun venue to be in to begin the year. Orlando, Dallas kind of does some of the same kind of stuff there as well. However, I think that there's an obvious trend moving the direction of the home-and-home thing, going to see what it looks like inside the Horseshoe, going to see what it looks like there in Austin, those schools, those fans having a chance to come see what it's like here in Athens. That's the place all of this is going. And I think it is undeniably apparent that the person that paved the way for all this to happen is Georgia coach Kirby Smart. Does it work out to the tune of, Georgia being involved in the national championship picture as much as I think is Smart's plan? And is Smart even around to coach all these games? Obviously, none of that is a given, but it was a big step forward when Georgia took it. And the validation of the idea is the fact that so many other programs are now walking in that same path that Smart himself walked in. And in the case of Saban in Alabama, given the fact that Saban turned 69 this year, it is obvious that Saban will not be coaching in all these games. So the idea of following in Saban's footsteps at Alabama just got much more difficult, knowing you're also going to be playing a lot of big-time non-conference games in the years to come there as well, and we'll make that your SEC through. And here for a moment, I want to talk about something that's probably not necessarily that important. I just think it's kind of interesting. Oh, by the way, before I do, let me also give a shout out to my friends at Kroger. Normally we do Kroger kickoff this time of the show, looking ahead to the big weekend for Georgia athletics. There's not a lot to look forward to, at least for a few more weeks of Georgia athletics. Those voluntary workouts are ongoing. However, there is some sports this weekend, though. NASCAR's at Talladega, going to be 5,000 fans in attendance. I think this is Is this the first American sporting event with, I guess they had 1,000 for the race last weekend. Any other American sporting events have had fans? I guess this is probably the biggest number of fans we've had since part of the coronavirus lockdown. PGA Tour is at Harbortown in Hilton Head. That's a really fun course, really great tournament. I think it's is it Webb Simpson and Ian Poulter at the top of the leaderboard on that right now, although I guess y'all probably don't care. But that's what's going on there. Also, gamblers, be aware of this. Belmont Stakes is this weekend. We have a Triple Crown race on Saturday from Belmont Park there in New York. So you got that going on. So there is some sports to be aware of. And, of course, that's our Kroger kickoff brought to you by our friends at Kroger. Of course, many of you, in addition, looking forward to some sports this weekend, also looking forward to Father's Day as well. And Kroger can get you covered on that. If you're the dad, you want to drop some hints, tell your family to go buy you a gift card from Kroger. Tell them to stock up for you there. Or if you're trying to do that thing for your dad, buy the greeting card. Write the Happy Father's Day message in there. Get the gift card. Kroger, a great place to go to do that. And when you gift those gift cards between now and June 23rd, you also get some really good deals here. Bonus fuel points. You get 4 times the fuel points on gift card purchase between now and June 23rd. Also shop for the patio furniture, the outdoor stuff there as well. It's all available from our friends at Kroger. All right, back to the point I wanted to make a moment ago. As I said, this is probably not that important. It's just kind of interesting. So there's a national writer. His name's Bruce Feldman. He goes on the Paul Feinbaum show yesterday. The question came up of, so who do you see potentially doing in 2020 what LSU did in 2019? Taking a big leap forward offensively. And he cited 2 teams. He cited Georgia and Oregon. Now, Feldman's opinion is probably interesting in its own right, and maybe, it'd be worth talking about. I guess that's not the part of this that I find the most fascinating. What I find kind of fascinating is, and if you'll remember back during the season, we did talk about this just a little bit. I think there's a very interesting parallel that exists between Georgia and Oregon for the moment. Even if you go back and look at last year, Oregon is not maybe the Oregon that you remember of like the Chip Kelly era, the dazzling uniforms and like the up-tempo, offense, the, classic style. That's not necessarily what Oregon is anymore. They have brought a level of physicality that you don't see a ton of, frankly, out west all that much. Good defense. They've recruited very well on defense. Obviously, Georgia, well aware of that last couple of cycles. Really good offensive line. Very similar to Georgia there in that regard. A quarterback in Justin Herbert last year that wasn't universally praised, even though he was a very high draft pick. Kind of reminds you a little bit of some of the conversation that maybe existed a little bit around Jake Fromm a year ago. And now as you move towards 2020, there's also some similar parallels there as well. Georgia goes out and hires Todd Monken, an offensive coordinator, hopefully provides the offensive energy that Georgia needs. Oregon has kind of done the same thing with Joe Moorhead. Now, you can say that Moorhead was a failed coach at Mississippi State, and he was. But listen, there's a lot of folks who may not be quite head coach material, but are very good offensive coordinators. I think Moorhead is obviously a pretty good hire as an offensive coordinator. Go back and look at the work that he did at Penn State as an example of that. It becomes a very interesting comparison between Georgia and Oregon this year. Feldman on the Feinbaum show says, hey, these are the 2 programs that could take an LSU-like leap for this upcoming season. I've always been of the belief, if you want way better performance year over year, you need to tell me what's new. What have you brought in this year that's different than what you had a year ago? You're not going to make the big dramatic leap with the same coaches, the same players, just getting a year older. That a year older doesn't always make you a year better, and just 1 year's better isn't enough to provide dramatic change. Joe Burrow doesn't have the big leap from junior to senior season from 2018, 2019, if not for the presence of Joe Brady. So if you're looking for teams that can make that leap, the presence of Moorhead at Oregon makes that possible. The presence of Monken at Georgia makes that possible. Also, if you want to continue this comparison even further, Georgia turns to the ACC to bring in Jamie Newman. Oregon turns to the ACC as well, graduate transfer from Boston College and Anthony Brown. It's not obvious that Brown's going to be the starter at Oregon, but that's a parallel that's very similar to what's going on here at UGA too. So when you look at new quarterback, obviously new coordinator, the chance of upgrading the performance, even if it's not as much as what LSU did a year ago. In terms of being able to travel that path, the presence of a veteran at quarterback, the new offensive coordinator at least makes it possible. And if you follow national college football, if you pay attention to all that, watching how Oregon does as it tries to do some of the same things that Georgia's trying to do, I think that's going to be pretty fun to watch. All right, so we will wrap up here for you today, and we appreciate you being here and really being with us all week on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. It's fun to be able to do the show for each and every day. It's fun to be able to deliver it, and we just appreciate you being here as well. And, of course, something else we appreciate doing is our Gator Hater Updater. How about this? 1,329 days. That's how long it's been since the lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. And around here we say it, a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. It's the rivalry that's always mattered the most to us. It's been fun over the last couple of years to see other people kind of come in on board on that it's a game worth circling. It's always a game worth winning. And with all the hype that kind of spews out about, Florida from time to time, even higher stakes for this year, which makes that really fun. By the way, on Monday's show, speaking of quarterbacks and Jamie Newman, I think we're going to look a little deeper and a little more about what's been said about him recently. That should be fun to start next week. For now, though, have a great weekend. Thanks for being here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate R.S. Andrews making this part of the day possible. That means talking to you, taking your comments, and, of course, it also means thinking about what to do if your water heater goes out or if your air conditioning, if you're afraid it might go out. You can't sleep at night with a hot house in the summertime. So get some peace of mind, get your system tuned back up to factory fresh spec. My friends at R.S. Andrews, find them online at rsandrews.com. All right, we have got, we're a little late. Wow, I guess I went along with Jeff. So let's try to do, 10 minutes or so. It seems like the Facebook situation was pretty good today. At least I'm not seeing a lot of complaints over there. So that's good news on that front. And we'll try to do a little less than 10 minutes, and then we'll kind of get rolling after that. Randy Hall says Eddie hates the Gators so much he went blind. You're right about that. Lynn Johnson Shipman, thanks for the Happy Father's Day wishes. All right, let's see what else is going on here. John William Adams says, I wonder in a year how many more programs got LED lights, hoping to reveal next year. I feel it'll be the new norm. What's next? The drone disco ball or the blimp light show at center field? Or what will the next generation of game entertainment be? I think it's a really good question. I actually have a sneaking suspicion that the LED lights may not be as here to stay as maybe some people think they are. I don't think they look that great on television, to be honest with you. I think it's a really cool experience while you're in there. But sometimes it looks kind of weird on TV. So I kind of wonder how much staying power they really will have. Although your idea about a drone disco ball is actually pretty amazing. You should patent that if you haven't already done so. Hugh Nash, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Randy Hall says, how about a fan of the week or a fan of the month? That's actually a really good idea. I think that, and sometimes when I tease these kinds of things, they don't come to fruition. So I think for our, top fans, whether it be Facebook, YouTube, whatever, the people that are with us for this time, I think we've got something really fun that we're going to try in a couple of weeks. We're going to see how it works. And it's going to be something we've never done here before as a way of kind of, honoring some of our top people, getting to know some of our top people. I'll tell you more about that when I can, but it's going to be kind of a fun thing we're going to be doing very soon. Find out more about that very soon. So maybe not quite your idea, although I think your idea is a good one, but as a way of kind of honoring some of the people who are the most devoted to DawgNation Daily, I think we have some fun stuff to do with that here coming up pretty soon, maybe. Eric Dvornsey says, would like to get another 5-star before the end of June just to get back to the top 10 for now. Yeah, could certainly be on its way for sure. Philip Jordan Wells, I have no idea what some of his comments are about. Robert Barnes says the laser light shows are next. Yeah, that's one of those technologies that, I remember when Stone Mountain first started doing the laser show during the 80s. It was like the most amazing thing in the world. It doesn't really seem like our laser technology has advanced much since then, right? It's like laser shows were like the thing in the 80s, and yet here we are all these years later, and that kind of technology is sort of just still sort of there. I feel like we maybe haven't fully maximized our laser technology. Michael Webb on the subject of Donovan Edwards and what's going on at Michigan. Obviously, you would think about that, a particular program having in-state pull for Edwards. I mean, yeah, the fact that things aren't exactly great in Ann Arbor, you would hope it helps Georgia out a little bit, but I guess I still hear Michigan when it comes to Edwards a bit. James Crump says, to me, Saban losing Smart and Cristobal really hurt him in recruiting. Smart's just a step above Cristobal as far as recruiting goes. I do think that, Cristobal is one of those guys that you say, well, it hurt him to lose him, and understand where you're coming from on that. I think the opposite is also true as well, that when you have a guy like that, and Cristobal, I believe, was the offensive line coach there, when you have a guy like that, you can't keep that as one of your, position coach assistants. You just can't expect to keep him forever there in that regard. And so that was never bound to last, right? I mean, Cristobal was just, he had been a former head coach prior to, coming to Alabama. He was always kind of destined to being kind of that upwardly mobile, the upwardly mobile track. So that's not the kind of guy you're going to be able to keep forever. However, your larger point is true, whether it be the transition from Smart then to Jeremy Pruitt, who himself is a top-flight defensive coordinator, but after Smart and Pruitt leave, how do you replace that? I would say Alabama's had a hard time doing that. I think they unfairly scapegoated Tosh Lupoi for some of the defensive failures in 2018, but nonetheless, Lupoi, Alabama fans didn't like him. The current defensive coordinator, Alabama fans don't like him either. They're hoping Charlie Strong eventually replaces him. Plenty of Alabama fans feel that way. I'd Google Charlie Strong before you started thinking about that. There's some stuff popping up online about him today and some potential NCAA stuff maybe, but nonetheless, we will need to take your comments. Bill Kelly says dogs have too much talent not to be great this year, and that may indeed be the case. You certainly hope that's the case. Over here on YouTube for a moment. Lee, is it Godowns? I always pronounce this wrong, and I'm sorry, Lee. Anyone can nitpick on Saban. Truth is, he's created a program that's in the top 4 every single year almost. I've said that. Even as someone who has predicted that Georgia will beat Alabama this year, the one thing that I'm readily willing to acknowledge is it's not easy. It's not going to be done easily. Alabama's still, they're getting elite recruits still for the class of 2021. We never assumed that the low rating that Alabama had in recruiting was going to somehow, be maintained the entirety of the cycle. This is still, as we had Bud Elliott on the show yesterday, this is still a team from the blue chip ratio standpoint that's at the top of the list. They still measurably have a little bit more talent than Georgia does. Georgia has recruited as well as it has, and the end result is it's only a fair fight between Georgia and Alabama now, as opposed to a clear advantage for UGA. So I believe that Georgia will eventually topple this giant, but it's not going to be easy. Not in September in Tuscaloosa, not in December in Atlanta. It's just not going to be easy. More YouTube comments, then we got to go. Okay, good. Thank you. Go Downs is right. So, Lee, I'm glad to know that. Thank you. A couple more. Johnny Underhill says Zeus will have a huge year. Heisman numbers. Boy, that'll be fun to think about if that's indeed the case. Noah Sheldon also feeling good about Jermaine Burton this upcoming season. It's easy to understand why that is. Chili Vic, who's an LSU fan, says keep sleeping on Miles Brennan. He's in the same situation as Burrow. Don't have to go to class much. We will keep the offensive structure. So obviously that's an LSU fan feeling pretty good about Miles Brennan. I think the bigger loss there for me, as I've said this a million times, I just think it's tough to replace Joe Brady. I don't think Scott Linehan was a bad hire as passing game coordinator. I just think it's really hard to match what happened there a year ago. Maybe the infrastructure that Brady put in place, maybe it's the same way. Somebody, this is kind of an obscure reference, but somebody once shared the thing of, remember how in Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon, after he solved the big formula, he lit it on fire and burned it up. Somebody once shared that video as a way of saying what Joe Brady did at LSU. He took the playbook and lit it on fire on the way out the door. Maybe he didn't do that. Maybe the plays are still there, but matching that with new personnel, both in the coaching ranks and the passing game ranks, could be a little different. Cody Ledoux also likes Javon Baker, the wide receiver at Alabama. Yeah, that's a prospect we certainly followed in the 2020 class for sure. Cody Ledoux also says Bryce Young will absolutely be special. Very well could. This is a good question. Somebody talking about Mike D says, so BA, how do you feel about the 4 days of rest between Virginia and Georgia's second game? And then it is definitely an unusual schedule when you're, and I lost the comment for a second, but it's definitely an unusual schedule when your first game's on a Monday, right? You kind of get into a little bit of a weird schedule after that. I think on the actual day itself, I think it'll be kind of fun to play on a Monday. It's one of those things I haven't quite wrapped my mind around, that Georgia will be playing on a Monday night as opposed to a Saturday. But I think, for that thing, as long as you don't, be too bleary-eyed in the morning, playing on a Monday should be pretty fun. But obviously, it's good to know that you're not playing, some, huge opponent the following game, because you clearly have a much shorter practice route. Because I'm assuming that you'll have to give, some rest, some recovery on Tuesday, which is going to put you into a little shorter schedule getting ready for that next Saturday game. And I'm sure Kirby Smart will probably bring that up at the time. A couple more comments. We'll get ready to go. Chili Vic also bringing up the idea that LSU switching from a 3-4 from a 4-3 from a 3-4. I saw where Ed Orgeron was talking about that the other day. I guess this is personnel related, just given the makeup of the roster at the moment. I think one of the things we haven't talked about enough, Vic, is the fact that Bo Pelini is back at LSU as defensive coordinator. This is another guy that I don't know that I necessarily like as a head coach. I don't think he was particularly good at Nebraska, but pretty clearly this is a pretty highly regarded defensive coordinator. Obviously, LSU fans know that as well as anybody does. So whether it be shifting over to a 4-3, whatever else, I think just the presence of Pelini in Baton Rouge, I think is a pretty big deal. We haven't talked about it enough, probably. Honestly, the reason why we're not talking on this show is because Georgia's not scheduled to play LSU right now. But in terms of the impact on the league, as I said before, veteran defensive coordinator in Baton Rouge in comparison to, unproven younger guy at Alabama. At this point in time, how many defensive coordinators in the SEC West are better than Pete Golding? I'll take Pelini over Golding. I'll take Kevin Steele over Golding. I'll take what's his name at Texas A&M, Elko. I'll take Mike Elko over Pete Golding there as well. So I might take Barry Odom in Arkansas. So that's one of the advantages if you're looking for a reason why LSU can still make some noise, why LSU can still beat Alabama for a second consecutive year. The presence of Pelini as a defensive coordinator making that unit better, because one way or another, Brennan compared to Burrow is going to be some drop off, right? So you're going to have, no Clyde Edwards-Helaire, even if John Emory Jr. and Ty Davis, those guys end up being really good. You're going to have some drop off. So you need to be a little better defensively than you were a year ago, and you obviously not easy to do that with some of the guys that LSU lost, Delpit and some of the others. But the presence of Pelini, I think, really matter there. All right, we're like 1 minute away from getting off the air because we got a couple things we got to do. Bank 6 says, this is an interesting comment, that opening on a Monday and then very quickly playing Alabama on September 9th will create a sense of urgency for Georgia. I think Bank is potentially right about that. I think he's potentially right. Cody Ledoux says, could you honestly rate Golding fairly? He had to have 5-6 freshmen fully starting a handful of games. That's fine. My opinion on Golding, though, is based, Cody, on what I'm hearing from other Alabama fans. I mean, would you deny that it's been Alabama fans themselves who seemingly have been the harshest on Golding, at least in my mind? Jay Shipe says preseason top 5 for me. Let me do this quick. And this is kind of in no particular order. I think that Clemson's very hard to unseat in the ACC. I think that Ohio State's, even in a deeper Big Ten East, I think Ohio State's very, very good right now. I'm higher on Texas than some, and I'll put Georgia and Alabama. So that'll be my top 5 in some order. The 2 SEC teams, Bama and Georgia. I'll put Texas in there. I'll put Clemson. I'll put Ohio State. And then just missing for me would be an Oregon, who I think is worth some consideration. I'm sort of done with Oklahoma for now. If I had to look at a 6th, I would probably kind of get to Oregon there at that point in time. I think that not necessarily for top 5 consideration. I think that USC could be a little interesting this year in the Pac-12 if you're looking for those non-SEC teams to consider. But on the national level, I think that Clemson, Ohio State is almost at a completely different level than almost anybody else. And my next non-SEC playoff team that I'd be paying very close attention to would be Texas, probably. Maybe that doesn't put them preseason top 5 necessarily, but it would put them on that short list for the playoffs for sure. Let me do 1 or 2 more on Facebook, then I promise we're leaving. Jermaine King says Texas. You get the veteran quarterback. Herman's recruited better than you think. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but if we go back and look at their schedule for a year ago, I think you see a lot of close losses. And listen, this is all unofficial, so don't hold me to this particular statement. But I believe you see some close losses. Let me see if I can quickly type this in. Hold on. To help if I think you see some close losses that they have a chance to come back from. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see if I'm right about the close losses. Yeah, so they lost by a touchdown to LSU. That's a game I think Texas can win this year, with all due respect to our LSU fans on the other side. Lost 34-27 to Oklahoma. That's a close loss. Did lose by 10 to TCU. lost 23-21 to Iowa State, did lose by 2 touchdowns to Baylor. So, yeah, when you look at a lot of those losses, you're talking about close losses that, could have gone another way. I think that Texas starts the season undervalued. I do. I think that's probably worth paying attention to. And that's where we're going to have to leave the conversation for today. We can talk more about our playoff picks later on. Hope all of you have a great weekend. Thanks for being here as a part of DawgNation Daily. Presented by Kroger. Check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for all your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Air conditioning goes out. You can certainly get that taken care of with them. They'll get your system back to factory fresh specs. Also, check out the AJC as well, online at ajc.com. Get all your Atlanta news now. Obviously, today is a day that our society honors Juneteenth, and this is a real movement. I think there's a very good chance that within a couple years, this is viewed as a true national holiday. And I spent some time reading about this over the course of the last 24 hours or whatever. It's actually pretty fascinating to learn more about it. I'm embarrassed to say that until a couple of years ago, I probably didn't know anything about it, and certainly don't know as much now as I should. But in learning more about this, it's really a pretty amazing story. And it's the kind of thing that you can read more about at ajc.com, a good way to kind of learn about something that's probably talked about, rightly so, more now than it's ever been before. Also, a lot of folks grilling out this weekend on their Father's Day. Some good stuff on that ajc.com about just how spending time around the grill can kind of connect a family together around a dad. That's really good stuff there as well. And some stuff related to the economy as well in terms of how the coronavirus is impacting the housing market and everything else. You can follow all of that online and get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Thanks to all of you for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger here today. Have a great weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you on Monday, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.